It started subtly at first, just small things that most people wouldn't even notice. But when you've been married for 10 years, you learn to pick up on the nuances, the little shifts in routine that signal something is off. Megan had always been attentive, not overly affectionate, but we had a rhythm, a way of moving through our days together that felt natural. Lately, though, that rhythm was offbeat. I noticed she'd become distant. At first, I chalked it up to work stress. She had just started a new project, one that was taking up more of her time than usual. Long hours in the office, late nights filled with conference calls. It seemed like a reasonable explanation. But then, something changed in her behavior at home. The easy conversations we used to have, the way she'd talk about her day, even the trivial things, those moments started to fade. Our talks became shallow, like she was going through the motions without really being present. It felt like she was hiding something behind her words. I tried to ignore it at first. Tried to tell myself I was just being paranoid, reading too much into things. But as the weeks went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't just the silence, it was the way she acted around her phone. Megan had never been secretive with her phone before. She'd leave it lying around, unlocked, and I never had any reason to look at it. But now, she carried it with her everywhere. If she left the room, her phone went with her. If it buzzed with a notification, she would glance at it quickly and lock the screen before I could see anything. The way her thumb would hover over the screen for a split second too long, as if she was deciding whether to respond or ignore whoever was messaging her. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I noticed her phone light up again. She glanced down, her face illuminated for just a moment, and then she flipped the phone face down on her lap. She used to be the one who would sit next to me, scrolling through her social media feed, occasionally showing me something funny or asking my opinion about something. Now, she hardly showed me anything. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it hit me, but slowly, I began to suspect the worst. My mind started filling in the gaps that her behavior was creating. Was she talking to someone? Was there someone else? I hated the thought, but it was there, growing in the back of my mind like a seed of doubt. Every time I saw her typing away on her phone, or when she'd smile faintly at a message she'd read but never share with me, the seed grew. The rational part of me kept telling myself that there could be 1,000 explanations. Maybe it was a work-related chat. Maybe she was planning a surprise for me, though that thought felt less and less likely as time passed. But the more I tried to reason with myself, the more I couldn't shake the sense of betrayal. At night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments in my head. Looking for signs. Had I missed something? Had there been warning signs earlier that I ignored? The way she had pulled away from me, the coldness in her voice when she said she was tired or had a long day, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle I was too afraid to solve. The worst part was, I didn't want to confront her. Not yet. A part of me was terrified of what I might find out. It was easier to live in this state of uncertainty than to ask the questions that might confirm my worst fears. It happened one evening when I wasn't even looking for anything specific. I wasn't the type to go through Megan's phone, no matter how suspicious I had grown over the last few weeks. Part of me still wanted to trust her, to believe that all my doubts were just in my head. But that night, the universe seemed to have different plans. She had gone to take a shower after dinner, leaving her phone on the kitchen counter. Usually, she took it with her everywhere, but tonight she must have been distracted. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, but then her phone buzzed. Just one small notification, but enough to catch my attention. I glanced over, telling myself I wouldn't snoop. But my curiosity was overpowering. The screen lit up, and that's when I saw his name, Oliver. My heart sank. Oliver, her former colleague. I had met him a few times at work events when Megan and I used to go together. He was charismatic, the kind of guy who could charm anyone in the room. I never thought much of him at the time. He was just another one of her work friends. But now, seeing his name on her phone with a message, something felt off. I tried to convince myself it was innocent. After all, people from work stayed in touch, didn't they? But something about the timing, the secrecy with her phone lately, it all started to come together in a way I didn't like. My hand hovered over the phone, hesitation gnawing at me. I knew that opening her phone, even just reading one message, could change everything. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. I picked up the phone and swiped the screen. Her phone wasn't locked, another thing that seemed odd. I opened the messaging app, my heart pounding in my chest, and there it was, an entire thread of messages between Megan and Oliver. At first glance, the conversation seemed casual, friendly even. They talked about their old coworkers and reminisced about inside jokes from the office. But as I scrolled further back, the tone shifted. It became more personal, more intimate. "Oliver, I miss our talks. It's not the same without you at the office." Megan, I miss them too, and more. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I read on, my hands shaking. It wasn't just friendly conversation anymore. They were flirting, there was no mistaking it. Every message was laced with innuendo, subtle at first, but then growing bolder, more explicit. "Oliver, when can we see each other again? Last time was too short." "Megan, I know, but it's hard to find time. We have to be careful." "Last time?" The words jumped out at me. That was the moment it became real. This wasn't just emotional cheating, it was physical. They had met, and not just once. The casualness of how they spoke about it, the ease with which they talked about seeing each other behind my back, made my blood boil. I could almost see their faces, imagining them laughing at me, thinking I was too blind to notice. I scrolled further, unable to stop myself. Every message was another stab to the heart. "Oliver, you looked amazing last time. I can't stop thinking about you." "Megan, you're too sweet. I think about you too, a lot." I felt like I was in a nightmare, reading their words, seeing how they had built something together, something that was meant to be ours. My mind raced with questions. When did this start? How long had this been going on? Was everything between us just a lie? But at that moment, I wasn't ready for answers. I could barely breathe, let alone process what I was reading. It felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling. My chest was tight, my mind buzzing with 1,000 thoughts, but one thing stood out: she had betrayed me. Megan, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, had been lying to me. And for what? For him? I could hear the water still running in the shower. I had a few minutes, maybe less, before she came out. My first instinct was to confront her, to storm into the bathroom and demand answers. But I stopped myself. I knew if I confronted her now, in the heat of the moment, I'd lose control. And I needed to think. I needed to figure out what I was going to do next. I locked her phone and placed it back on the counter, exactly where it had been. My heart was still racing, but I forced myself to act normal. As I stood there, trying to keep it together, I heard the water turn off. Megan would be out any minute now. I took a deep breath, gripping the edge of the counter for support. My world had just been turned upside down, and I had no idea what was coming next. The shock was instant, like a punch to the chest that knocked the air out of my lungs. I stood there, staring at the counter where her phone lay, trying to make sense of it all. My mind was racing, but at the same time, I felt numb. How could Megan do this to me, to us? For a moment, I couldn't even feel my own body, just a hollow ache spreading through my chest, as if my heart had been ripped out and left gaping and raw. Images flashed through my mind: our wedding day, our vacations, the late nights we spent talking about the future. I thought I knew her. Thought we were solid, even through the ups and downs. But now it all felt tainted. Every memory was stained by this betrayal. Everything we had built together suddenly seemed fragile, like a house of cards that had collapsed without warning. But the numbness didn't last long. Soon, it was replaced by something else, something darker. Anger. It started slow, simmering just below the surface, but it grew quickly, swelling until it felt like I was going to explode. How could she do this to me? How dare she? I wasn't some fool who would let this slide. Megan had betrayed me, and not just with anyone, with Oliver, someone we both knew. It felt like a double betrayal, and I could feel the rage building with every passing second. I clenched my fists, my whole body tense. I wanted to scream, to break something, to confront her right then and there. But I knew that wasn't enough. Words alone wouldn't make this right. I couldn't just yell and let it out. I needed more than that. I needed revenge. I needed her to feel the pain I was feeling, to understand the depth of her betrayal. And it wasn't just Megan. Oliver wasn't innocent in this. He was part of it, and in some ways, it felt like he was worse. He knew she was married. He knew we had a life together, and yet, he still chose to cross that line. The thought of the two of them together, laughing at me behind my back, sent waves of anger through me, fueling a desire for justice. They had both deceived me, and there was no way I was going to let them get away with it. I couldn't just confront Megan in the heat of the moment. That wouldn't be enough. I needed something bigger, something more calculated. I needed a plan, a way to make sure they both paid for what they had done. The idea hit me like a lightning strike. If I was going to get my revenge, I needed to start with Oliver. He was the key. If I could get to him, maybe I could unravel this whole thing, and expose them both for the liars they were. I would hit him where it hurt, and through him, I'd get to Megan. But how? How could I approach him without revealing the depth of my rage? I needed to be calm. To act like I wasn't affected, like I knew everything but didn't care. It would be a risky move, but if I could pull it off, it might give me the upper hand. I sat down, trying to steady my breath, and typed out a message to him. "Hey, Oliver, it's Paul. I think we need to talk." I stared at the screen, waiting, half expecting him to ignore it. But a few minutes later, his reply came in. "Paul, yeah, sure, what's this about?" My fingers hovered over the keys. I couldn't reveal too much. Not yet. About Megan. I know everything. I hit send and leaned back, my heart pounding. The moment those words left my phone, there was no turning back. I imagined the look on his face as he read them: surprise, fear, maybe even panic. The thought gave me a twisted sense of satisfaction. Let him squirm. Let him wonder how much I knew and what I was planning. His response came quicker than I expected. "Look, man, I don't know what you've heard, but we should talk. Face to face." I smirked at the screen. Of course, he wanted to meet in person. He was probably trying to get ahead of whatever fallout was coming his way. Little did he know, I was already ahead of him. "Fine," I typed back. "Tomorrow, 7 p.m., at the cafe on Maple Street." He agreed, and as soon as I hit send, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The pieces were falling into place. I wasn't just going to sit back and be the victim. I was taking control. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Megan, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. I could hear her breathing softly beside me, completely unaware of what I had discovered, unaware of the storm that was coming. It took everything in me not to wake her up and confront her right then and there. But I needed to stay focused. Tomorrow would be the first step in my plan, and I had to play it cool. As I drifted in and out of sleep, one thought kept repeating in my mind: they both deserved to pay for what they had done. And I wasn't going to stop until they did. The next day came, and by the time 7 p.m. rolled around, I was ready. I walked into the cafe on Maple Street, the place we had agreed to meet, feeling a mix of adrenaline and anger coursing through my veins. I scanned the room and saw him, already sitting at a table near the window. Oliver looked nervous, fidgeting with his phone, and glancing around as if he was trying to prepare for what was about to happen. I approached the table, forcing a casual smile as I sat down across from him. He looked up at me, his face unreadable. "Paul," he said, nodding in greeting. "Thanks for meeting me." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice steady. "So, let's get to it. I know about you and Megan." For a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, guilt, maybe, or fear. But then he composed himself, leaning forward with his hands clasped together. "Look, man, I'm sorry about what happened. I never meant for things to get this far. I know it's a mess." I held up my hand to stop him. "I'm not here for apologies. What's done is done. I just want to understand where we go from here." He looked confused. "What do you mean?" I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "I mean, we can help each other. You don't want this blowing up in your face, and I'm not looking for drama. Let's figure out how we can both come out of this without everything going to hell." He seemed to relax a little at that, nodding slowly. Yeah, I think we can work something out." Little did he know, I wasn't interested in working anything out. I was setting him up, and soon enough, he'd realize just how badly he had underestimated me. Sitting across from Oliver at that cafe, I wasn't sure what to expect. I thought maybe he'd come up with excuses, maybe some half-hearted attempt to patch things up or justify what he and Megan had been doing behind my back. But what I didn't anticipate was how quickly he turned the conversation from awkward apologies to bitter complaints about her. It started innocently enough. He was fidgeting with his coffee cup, his eyes darting between me and the people passing outside the window. I could tell he was nervous, unsure of how I was going to react, but after a few minutes of shallow pleasantries, he finally broke. "You know, man, I didn't plan for any of this to happen. It just got complicated," he said, looking up at me. "Megan and we got close back at the office. But it's not what you think. It wasn't just about, that. I didn't say anything, just watched him, waiting for him to dig himself deeper. He seemed to take my silence as permission to continue. "She's not who you think she is," he blurted out, his voice dropping lower, as if we were sharing some dark secret. "Megan, she uses people. She knows how to get what she wants, and she doesn't care who she hurts in the process." That caught me off guard. I expected him to try and charm his way out of this, to play the victim, maybe shift the blame onto me. But instead, he turned his bitterness toward Megan. He leaned forward, his voice more intense now. "You know what it's like, don't you? Living with her? She has this way of making you feel like you're never enough. No matter what you do, you're always falling short. She can twist things, make you think it's your fault when really, she's the one pulling all the strings." His words hit me like a punch in the gut. I had spent so long thinking of Megan as the person I loved, the person I trusted. Despite everything that had happened. But as he spoke, something shifted in my mind. The way he described her manipulations, the way she used people, it sounded disturbingly familiar. It wasn't just his affair with her that was coming to light, it was the way she had slowly distanced herself from me, the subtle gaslighting that made me question myself. Maybe he was right. "She's been doing this for years," Oliver continued, shaking his head. "She plays people off each other, makes them think they need her. And when she's done with them, she tosses them aside like they're nothing." I stayed quiet, my hands resting on the table, my jaw tight as he spoke. There was a venom in his voice, a raw anger that surprised me. He wasn't just some guy who had stolen my wife. He was someone who had been used by her, just like I had been. "And you think it's different with me?" Oliver scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "You think I'm any better off? She's been stringing me along, too. Making me think there's a future. That we're gonna run off together or something. But deep down, I know she's just using me. I'm not the first guy she's done this to, and I probably won't be the last." I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Here I was, sitting across from the man who had been sleeping with my wife, and instead of a confrontation, we were bonding over how she had manipulated both of us. The absurdity of it all made my stomach churn. "She's poison, Paul," Oliver said, his voice now deadly serious. "And the worst part? She doesn't care. She'll do whatever it takes to get what she wants, and we're just collateral damage." I could feel the anger inside me boiling again, but this time it wasn't just directed at Oliver. It was directed at Megan. How many lies had she told? How many people had she hurt? I had thought I was the only victim, but now I realized that Oliver was just as much a pawn in her game as I was. I leaned in, my voice cold. "So, what do you want to do about it?" Oliver looked at me for a long moment, as if testing to see if I was serious. When he saw the hard look in my eyes, he knew I was. "We ruin her," he said, his voice low but firm. "We make her pay for what she's done to both of us." I nodded slowly, my mind already racing with possibilities. It was a dangerous game we were about to play, but I didn't care. Megan had torn my life apart, and I wasn't going to just stand by and let her get away with it. We began to talk, trading ideas back and forth. It was almost frightening how quickly we fell into step with one another. There was no hesitation in Oliver's voice as he described how we could sabotage her career. He still had contacts at her old office, people who would be more than happy to spread rumors or leak information that would make her look bad. I had connections too. People who could make things difficult for her in ways she wouldn't see coming. But it wasn't just about ruining her reputation. We wanted to make her feel as small and powerless as she had made us. We talked about how we could undermine her friendships and turn people against her. We could sow doubts among her closest allies, make them question her motives, her loyalty. It wouldn't take much, just a few well-placed comments, a few accidental slips of information, and the cracks would start to show. The more we talked, the more the plan took shape, and the more my anger began to harden into something darker. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Megan had played us both, and now she was going to pay the price. By the time we finished our coffee, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction settling in. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had some control over the situation. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was taking action. And it felt good. Oliver stood up, tossing a few bills on the table to cover the check. He looked at me, his expression serious. "We do this right, and she won't see it coming." I nodded, standing to shake his hand. She deserves everything that's coming to her. As I left the cafe and walked down the street, the cool evening air hitting my face, I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of relief. The pain was still there, but now it was mixed with something else, a dark resolve. Megan had turned my life upside down, but now I had a plan. And with Oliver on my side, I wasn't just going to take back control, I was going to tear her world apart, piece by piece. The first steps were subtle. Megan didn't even notice when things started to go wrong, which was exactly how I wanted it. It was all part of the plan, small, insignificant setbacks that would slowly unravel her life, piece by piece. I wasn't looking for a dramatic confrontation, not yet. I wanted her to feel the frustration, the confusion, to watch her carefully constructed world begin to crumble without her understanding why. At work, I made a few quiet phone calls. I knew people in her industry, and I knew how to stir the waters without leaving any fingerprints. Megan had always prided herself on being a step ahead, but I made sure that a couple of her key projects suddenly hit roadblocks. Files went missing, emails mysteriously failed to send. A meeting with an important client got rescheduled without her knowledge, causing her to show up late and unprepared. Little things, but in her fast-paced career, they added up. She came home one evening, her face tight with frustration. "I don't know what's going on at work," she muttered, dropping her bag by the door. "Everything's falling apart." I watched her, my heart cold. It felt good to see her like this, to see the cracks start to form. "It's just a rough patch," I said, feigning sympathy. "You'll figure it out." But it wasn't just her work. Oliver was playing his part, too. He was still seeing her, still stringing her along, but he had become careless, or maybe that was intentional. He started leaving little hints that could lead to their affair being exposed. A text sent at the wrong time, a comment dropped in front of the wrong person. He was careful enough not to get caught, but sloppy enough to make Megan nervous. I watched her become more paranoid as the days went on, checking her phone constantly, her eyes flickering with worry when she thought I wasn't looking. She was beginning to feel trapped, just like I had been. And I was there, watching it all unfold, silently enjoying her discomfort. The small victories felt satisfying, like each one brought me a step closer to regaining control of my life. But as much as I enjoyed watching her squirm, it wasn't enough. The little sabotages were only the beginning. We were just warming up. At first, Oliver and I were in perfect sync. We had a shared goal, and the plan was working. Slowly but surely, we were tightening the noose around Megan's life. But as the weeks passed, something began to shift. Oliver wasn't the same guy the first met in that cafe. The bitterness that had initially bonded us over our shared resentment of Megan was morphing into something darker, something unsettling. He became impatient, where I was content to let things unravel gradually. Savoring each small victory, Oliver started pushing for more. His suggestions, once reasonable, became more extreme, more dangerous. "We're going too slow," he said one day, his voice edged with frustration. We were sitting in a bar, nursing our drinks, discussing the next phase of our plan. "She's still in control. She still thinks she can juggle us both. We need to hit her harder." I frowned, taken aback by his intensity. "We're getting to her," I replied. "She's already starting to crack. It's only a matter of time before she breaks." But that wasn't enough for him. "We need to break her faster. Make her lose everything. We could leak the affair to her boss, and ruin her career for good. Or better yet, we could involve the police. Maybe get her caught up in something she can't talk her way out of." His words made my stomach turn. In the beginning, this was about revenge, about making Megan feel the pain she had caused me. But now, it felt like Oliver was driven by something else, something far more dangerous. He wanted destruction for the sake of destruction. "Isn't that going too far?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We wanted to make her pay, not destroy her completely." Oliver looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "What's the difference? She deserves everything she's got coming. Don't tell me you're going soft now." I stared back at him, a cold realization creeping over me. Oliver wasn't just in this for revenge. He wasn't just angry at Megan, he was obsessed with her downfall. The more I listened to him, the more I began to see how dangerous he had become. This wasn't just about payback for him anymore. It was about power, about control. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could trust him. As the days went on, his behavior grew more erratic. He'd call me late at night, his voice tense, talking about new ways we could push Megan over the edge. He wanted to escalate, to go bigger, to make sure there was no way for her to recover. It was as if he was feeding off the chaos, getting a thrill out of how far we could go. I started to question whether I had made a mistake by teaming up with him. This was supposed to be about justice, about making Megan face the consequences of her actions. But now, with Oliver pushing me further and further, I began to wonder if I had lost sight of why I started all of this in the first place. And then there was the nagging doubt that kept creeping into my mind. If Oliver was willing to go this far to take down Megan, what was stopping him from turning on me? After all, we weren't friends, we were just two men united by a shared enemy. How long before I became expendable in his eyes? The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. Oliver was spiraling, and I was caught in his orbit. The plan we had started together was beginning to slip out of my control, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep him in check. One thing was clear, though, this wasn't just about Megan anymore. Oliver had his agenda, and I was starting to wonder if I had become just another pawn in his twisted game. It started with something small. A missed call from a mutual acquaintance, a guy the first barely knew, but who worked in the same circle as Megan. He left a cryptic voicemail, something about being careful and how things don't always go as planned. At first, I brushed it off. After all, I was already juggling so much: my crumbling marriage, the secret war against Megan, and the escalating tension with Oliver. But something about the message nagged at me. It was a warning, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was meant for me. A few days later, while scrolling through my emails, I stumbled across a message from Oliver, only it wasn't meant for me. It was part of a thread he'd forwarded by accident. Attached was a document I didn't recognize, something buried deep in a chain of correspondence I wasn't supposed to see. My curiosity piqued, and I clicked on the attachment. What I saw made my stomach churn. It was a list, dates, times, detailed descriptions of everything I had done to sabotage Megan, but written as though I were the sole mastermind. It painted a picture of me as the one orchestrating the entire plot, while Oliver's name was conveniently absent, almost as if he was some innocent bystander, an outsider looking in on the chaos. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Was this some kind of sick joke? I read it again, slower this time, my pulse quickening as the truth began to take shape. Oliver had been documenting everything. All the little things we'd done to unravel Megan's life, the misplaced emails, the damaged work reputation. The whispers of her affair. Every detail was neatly written out, but with one glaring omission: him. It wasn't until I read the last paragraph that the full extent of his betrayal hit me like a freight train. There, in bold text, was a note about Paul's increasingly erratic behavior and potential risk to Megan's safety. It suggested that I had become obsessive, that I was a danger to her, and maybe even to myself. Oliver had laid the groundwork, casting himself as the concerned third party, while framing me as the unstable, vengeful husband spiraling out of control. I felt a cold sweat break across my skin. This wasn't just about Megan anymore. Oliver had been setting me up from the start. Every move I made, every piece of sabotage I thought was part of our plan, was a step toward my destruction. He was using me, manipulating me into doing his dirty work, and now he was positioning himself as the hero. The one who could swoop in and save Megan from the dangerous husband she didn't even realize was after her. I sat there, staring at the screen, my mind racing. How long had he been planning this? From the very beginning? Or had he seen an opportunity as our plan unfolded, twisting it to serve his twisted purposes? It was sick, but it made sense. By framing me, he not only got revenge on Megan but also made sure I would go down with her. Two birds, one stone. I thought back to our conversations. The way he had pushed for more, urged me to go further, to be more aggressive. I had assumed it was just his anger at Megan driving him. But now I saw it for what it was. He had been goading me, pushing me toward the edge, waiting for me to slip so he could swoop in and finish the job. Rage coursed through me, hot and blinding. I had trusted him. Despite everything, I believed that we were in this together, united by a shared betrayal. But all along, he had been playing me like a pawn in his own game. I stood up from my desk, pacing the room as the realization sank in. He had already set the stage. If I confronted him directly, he would only use it against me. He would spin the story, twist the facts, and paint me as the villain, while he walked away clean, leaving me to take the fall for everything. I had to be smart. I couldn't let my anger drive me into doing something rash, something that would only play into his hands. But at the same time, I couldn't just sit back and let him destroy me. He thought he had the upper hand, but he didn't know that I had seen his cards. I needed a plan, a way to turn this around, to expose him for what he was. But as I sat down again, trying to calm my racing thoughts, one thing became painfully clear. I was no longer just fighting Megan. Now, I had a new enemy, and he was far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. Oliver had set the trap, and I had walked right into it. But now, it was my turn to strike back. It all came crashing down faster than I could have imagined. One morning, I walked into work, feeling the familiar weight of the project that had consumed the last few years of my life. It was my pride, my focus, something I had built from the ground up. But there was a tension in the air that I couldn't quite place. People whispered behind my back. My eyes avoided mine as if everyone knew something I didn't. I shrugged it off at first, attributing it to stress, until I was called into a meeting with my boss. I remember sitting in that cold conference room, staring at the empty chairs around the table, trying to steady my breath. My boss, normally calm and professional, had an uncharacteristic tension in his posture. He sighed deeply before laying it all out. "There's been talk, Paul," he started, carefully choosing his words, "about your personal life, things you've been involved in outside of work, things that could impact this company." The blood drained from my face. I knew immediately what this was about. The sabotage with Megan, the manipulations with Oliver, it had spread. Somehow, the poison of our plot had seeped into my professional life. I tried to play it cool, to keep my voice steady, but my heart was pounding. "Personal matters are personal," I said, forcing a smile. "Whatever you've heard, it's not connected to the job." He shook his head, looking uncomfortable. "It's more than that, Paul. There are rumors, accusations that you've been unstable, that you've caused trouble not just in your marriage, but here, at work. People are starting to feel uncomfortable. Some of the clients, well, they've expressed concern." I felt my throat tighten. This couldn't be happening. But as he continued to speak, my world began to unravel. My boss explained that the company had decided to remove me from the project I had spent years developing. It was the crown jewel of my career, my ticket to bigger things, and now, it was being taken from me. "We can't afford to have distractions, especially with something as important as this," he said, almost apologetically. "I'm sorry, Paul. It's out of my hands." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat there, speechless, unable to process what I was hearing. The project was my life, my future, and now, because of Oliver's schemes, it was slipping through my fingers. As I left the office that day, the reality of it all began to sink in. My colleagues, people I had worked with for years, turned away as I walked by. Conversations stopped abruptly when I entered the room. It was as if I had become toxic, someone to avoid. And in that moment, I realized the full extent of Oliver's betrayal. He had been spreading rumors, feeding lies to people in my professional circle, just like he had done to destroy Megan's life. Only now, I was the target. It wasn't just my personal life that was falling apart. My career, the one thing I had left to cling to, was being ripped away from me, piece by piece. I had been so consumed by my desire for revenge, so focused on tearing down Megan's world, that I hadn't even noticed that my own was crumbling right beneath my feet. The worst part wasn't even losing the project. It was the realization that I had played right into Oliver's hands. I had been his pawn, his tool, manipulated from the very beginning. He had used my anger, my pain, to push his agenda, and in doing so, he had destroyed everything I had. I tried to fight back, to salvage what I could. I confronted him and demanded answers, but Oliver just smiled, cold, smug, and untouchable. He had won, and he knew it. There was nothing left to say. He had orchestrated the perfect downfall, and I had been too blind, too consumed by rage, to see it coming. And then there was Megan. She was gone. I came home one evening to find the house empty. Her clothes, her belongings, everything, gone. She hadn't left a note, hadn't even bothered to explain. I suppose she didn't need to. The writing was on the wall. The affair with Oliver had been the spark, but my actions, my obsession with revenge, had driven her away for good. I sat in the silence of our empty home, the echoes of my life swirling around me. The memories of our marriage, once filled with love, trust, and happiness, now felt like ghosts, haunting every corner of the house. I had wanted revenge, but instead, I had destroyed everything I had ever cared about. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had set out to punish Megan for her betrayal, to make her feel the pain I had felt. But in the end, I was the one left with nothing. My marriage was over. My career was in ruins. And the one person I thought was on my side, Oliver, had been the one pulling the strings all along. I tried to pick up the pieces, to rebuild something from the wreckage of my life. But it was too late. The damage was done, and there was no going back. Megan had moved on. Oliver had disappeared, leaving behind only the destruction he had orchestrated. And I was left alone, sitting in the ruins of my own making. In the end, the truth was painfully simple. My desire for revenge had consumed me and blinded me to everything else. And in my pursuit of vengeance, I had lost the one thing I thought I was fighting for, myself. As the days dragged on, I found myself replaying every moment in my head, searching for the point where it had all gone so wrong. There had been countless chances to walk away, to stop this madness before it consumed everything. I could have confronted Megan, talked to her, and sought closure in some way that didn't involve scheming in the shadows with a man I barely knew. But instead, I had chosen the path of destruction, fueled by bitterness and pride. And now, standing in the wreckage, all I had left were regrets. I had let my hatred for Megan turn me into something unrecognizable, a man willing to destroy his own life in the name of vengeance. Nights were the hardest. The quiet would stretch on forever, with no phone calls, no meetings to prepare for, and no Megan to argue or laugh with. I was left with my thoughts, and they were unforgiving. How had I allowed myself to be manipulated so easily? Why hadn't I seen through Oliver's lies from the beginning? The answers didn't matter anymore. The damage was done, and there was no one left to blame but myself. In trying to tear Megan down, I had unwittingly dismantled my own life, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the bitter taste of my defeat.